going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our pseudo-weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this time we are back to discuss more Streets of New Capenna stories, and in fact we're back for the final main story. We'll be back next week with the final side story. If you don't count the weird Elish Norn one, we're going to review that one as well, but
yes.
Anyway, we're here for the final main story, Episode 5, Hymn of the Angels by Elise Kova. My quick review at the top is this one is important. And so while the writing I thought was fine, right? I had nothing, I don't think I'm going to be jumping up and down about how incredible and absolutely phenomenal this story was. It's important and it helps set up things for the future. And so it's important for you to read it. Not necessarily because it's like a fantastic piece of literature, although I didn't dislike it. I think it was just on par with a fine story. It's still important for you to know what's going on, so I still encourage you to read it for that reason.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I think it's the things that happen are cool, but it's not like described in such a way that you like fall in love with the language or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward. But it's a cool story. Yes,
and at the end of it, there's a lot of information that you come away from it with that you wouldn't really have otherwise, and so it's kind of important. So, if you have not gotten a chance to read this story for yourself, and that sounds compelling to you, we will be doing our best to talk about some of the important beats here and there, but like, if you want a more full context, please feel free to check the top link in the description down below. You can go right to the story there. You don't have to go looking around for it. We are trying to remove as many barriers as possible to help you check out the story for yourself, or if you want a reminder, because maybe it's been a little bit since you've read it. But regardless, if you go away to go do that, of course, we would love it if you would then come back here and join us as we do go through our full review. And so before we do that full review, I'm actually going to try to make this plug super quick because there's a lot of information to talk about with this particular story. So, hi, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And if you're enjoying any and all of the things that we do here on this channel or on our other channels, links in the description box below, for Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All, you should definitely consider subscribing and ringing the bell on any and all of them, this one or those. We have 3 uploads a week on Video Games for All, 1 upload a month on Gluten Free for All, and we do these jars here. We're going to have openings coming out soon for Streets of New Capenna, more openings of pre-release kits, so definitely stay tuned for that. We do have some bundle battles in the works, although those are going to be a little bit far off just because of all the other things that we have stacked up. And then we stream live on this channel twice a week, every Monday and Friday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. And we would love it if you would join us. Mondays are MTG Arena, where we play mostly limited, almost exclusively. So you can come join us for that. We would love to have you. And then on Fridays, we play through whatever game we happen to be playing through at the time. So depending on when you're watching this. But this Friday, after this video comes out, in fact, the day after this video comes out, we will be playing through more. In fact, our second stream of our Pokemon Fire Red Nuzlocke. We started off pretty well. I'm not going to spoil anything for you. The VODs are over on Video Games for All, so you can check that out as well. But it's been going well so far, and we would love it if you would join us to see where it progresses from there. That's it. That's all my plugs. Is there anything for you? You're good? Okay. I tried to go through it quickly because we have a lot to talk about. So let's get on to the full review itself. I appreciated how the story started with a great timeline. That's important. We've had issues with that in stories in the past that have been extremely frustrating, where we're like, okay, how long have they been here? What's going on? How long has it been since the last time we saw this particular character? Like, sometimes it's like very confusing because there are story beats that are relevant to you understanding how long it's been, and other times it's just like, could this be like months later, or is this like the next day? This story, these stories, I will say, the main stories, have done a phenomenal job of Elspeth basically saying, like, wow, I can't believe it's been that many weeks since I've been here, right? Like, sure, it's there to help us out. I'm not offended by that. I appreciate it. So, for example, it says that the tests that she did, aka the third story, was a few weeks ago. That's relevant because it means we know she'd been with the Cabaretti for a while after the tests.
Right.
We know that the tests took her a while. She had to get in with the Cabaretti, and then the crescendo occurs and she runs away. And so, I mean, this story is very obviously seconds after the last one ended, but to know how far it's been since story number 3, or episode 3, if you will, is super important, and I appreciated that. I think they did a great job here with that.
Yeah, because it's important to establish that here, because it's important to realize that just because we're only seeing bits and pieces of the journey here doesn't mean that there wasn't enough time for her to really establish relationships
Yes.
and things like that are then going to come into play, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about something that, I mean, I kind of had a problem with, but kind of didn't, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, but we both kind of noticed this and talked about it. There's a point in the story where the story again mentions, or Elspeth kind of in her head mentions, that the Cabaretti / basically everyone on the plane is looking to use JaAR as a tool, and they're looking to wring her dry of all of her halo of making abilities,
right,
or whatever. And it's like, yes, that's like word for word what you said in the last story, and you didn't add anything to it.
Right.
We've talked about this in the past with other stories when it wasn't necessarily as clear, or when each story in a set was one of like 15, right? Sure, you might have people starting at that point. This is story 5 of 5.
Right.
Why is this the one where you feel that you have to give that recap? Right. You've not given a recap in any of your other stories, and so this, it just felt...
Did you think that people would start reading the stories, get tired of it, and then go straight to the end to find out what happened?
Yeah, very weird. Very, very weird. It literally felt like it was like copied and pasted with and change a word here or there, like reorder the sentences, you know? Like people do in like college essays or whatever, when they like submit it and the professor's like, oh, it's not good enough, change this around. Okay. Like delete random things and like switch things around. Like it really felt like that. And I was like, really? Like again, it's the 5th story. I haven't felt like there's been reiteration in any of the other main stories. Right. So why in the 5th one only? It just seemed very odd to me. So I figured I'd talk about it.
And I think that's related to something I had you write down later.
Okay.
Which was the fact that they said she scooped JaAR up.
Oh yeah.
I'll give you a second to find that.
Yeah, it's definitely here. It was important.
Because I think it's kind of ironic that line is essentially copy and pasted, whereas this bit of dialogue or story that we're about to read basically is the opposite of what they said in the other story.
Yeah, so what I wrote here was, even in a scary situation, Elspeth basically forces JaAR to leave Ginny behind in the fight or the assault from the Obscura to save her, JaAR's life. Quote, practically scooped JaAR up is exactly what you said.
Which is exactly the opposite of what the other stories established from a character standpoint.
Right.
Is something that Elspeth would actually do to JaAR.
Well, you said other stories. Literally the last story,
right,
and literally these exact 2 characters with almost exactly this interaction. It was like, hey, Elspeth didn't say to her in story 4, right, episode 4, we're in episode 5 here. Elspeth didn't technically say to her in episode 4, if we don't leave now, we're going to die. But if they didn't leave then, they were likely going to die, because they were going to be, or Elspeth would die and JaAR would be taken to, again, be wrung out, used as a tool, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But yeah, it was almost exactly the same scenario. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And so I thought it was bizarre.
Yeah.
Because it was like, okay, so when we read that first part, we were like, okay, so clearly this author read the other story and worked off of that to write this one. And then when we got to that point, it was like, okay, clearly they didn't read it.
Well, it's the same author.
Oh, it's the same author.
It's because it's the main story. Elise Kova does all the main stories, and then the side stories are different people. Like Elise did one of them, but we're talking about the main stories
Gotcha.
here. They're all written by the same person.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking of the last story, who was a different author than any of the stories of New Capenna.
Correct, yeah.
But that was
But
a
that's
side
the side
story.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so that doesn't make any sense. It's like, unless what you're trying to do is say, this whole time she was respecting this, but in this situation it was so grave and dire that she couldn't respect that. And so it had to be this. But then you could have actually said that, or like gone a little bit more in detail to convey that urgency to us, so that we would understand, oh, she's doing that now because it's so grave.
Right.
And I didn't feel that they adequately did that.
I agree with that. I can agree with that. As with literally anything that we ever talk about in any of our JaARs, by the way, if you're unfamiliar, if you don't agree, or if you have other opinions, parallel opinions, whatever, we would love to hear from you, as always, about anything that we talk about in the comments down below, that included. So please, we would love to hear your opinions. Again, comparing, contrasting, whatever, as always. Good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. There's more parallels with Elspeth and JaAR brought up here towards the beginning, which, it was brought up a lot in the last one. But even in this one, now you have Elspeth kind of being the Ajani in a conversation with JaAR, similar to the Ajani-Elspeth conversation that occurred at the beginning of story 1, or like episode 1 or whatever. Now, Elspeth is having a similar conversation with JaAR and has that moment of like comeuppance of like, oh, I was upset with Ajani when he said this to me, but now I can only say this to her because it's the only answer to what she's asking. Even though she's asking the same question I asked, and now I have to respond the same way my friend Ajani did, whom I was upset with when he answered that way, right? Like, it makes sense. There's something I have at the end that I want to kind of talk about, that a direction that I feel like these stories are going, and that this is part of it, is like the, remembering back to the beginning of the first story of him having that conversation with her, and now she's having that conversation, and realizing that he is a true friend, and he has been all along. We'll get to it.
I don't think that she thought that he was an untrue friend.
Correct.
Because of that. She
Correct.
was just a little bit resentful that the answer couldn't really be, here's the answer.
Yeah.
It had to be, well, you're going to need to figure out what that answer is. And, that doesn't help in that situation, right? Because you're like, okay, I need the answer to this question. And the answer is, well, you're going to need to, like, go through your life to figure out what the answer is because it's different for everyone.
Right.
And that answer is the answer, but it also isn't an answer, Yeah. So, I don't think she thought that he was a bad friend because of that. I think she was just upset that it wasn't a real answer, to the question. And I thought that was actually kind of cute. How it was like, it could come full circle.
Okay. Then we get to kind of some of the nonsense with the Obscura. Like, I'm not going to remember her name. It kind of doesn't matter. But the woman from the Obscura who helps them, the Cephalid. You can put her name in the comments if you want. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, in my opinion. But one of the Obscura helps Ginny and is housing Jetmir. And so they go to this stronghold, the same place that Elspeth has been in the past. And they go to this stronghold, and then there's an assault on the stronghold from the Riveteers and the Maestros, or representatives from the Riveteers and the Maestros, who have defected to the adversary's side, it seems. And I thought to myself, it's funny, first of all, I did not once think, why weren't the brokers part of it? But I did think, why weren't there Obscura agents as part of this fight? Right, we were talking about this. That why weren't the Obscura? That you had a relatively good answer, I think, but I thought
really? I don't remember.
Well,
what it was.
I was gonna say, because we kind of brainstormed it a bit. My thing was, I was like, okay, there's no way there aren't Obscura agents that are working for the adversary. Like, he's infiltrated every family, we know he has, so why aren't the Obscura agents part of this attack? And what I wrote was, at the time, before they actually revealed it, and I was proven correct, they yeah, sorry, I had to get that off. The Obscura, I said to myself, I was like, okay, so if the Obscura they know that Ginny is going to find, or try to find, the font, which, by the way, F Ginny.
Right.
She sees Giada and thinks that Giada is happy to see her. We both kind of referenced this. Do you want to talk about it?
Well, I would just say she thinks that Ginny, she thinks that Giada is happy to see her because of gaslighting. And like,
yes, well, and thankfully Giada is smart enough to be like, oh my god, it's so good to see you. Let's go get out of here. Come on.
Saving me.
Yeah. Like, oh, Elspeth, she kept me safe, but come on, it's time to go. And like, saved Elspeth's life in the process. Like, Ginny was going to slit her throat, right? Or like stab her in the neck or whatever. But I was more, that's important, but I was also going to reference the fact that Ginny's just like, oh, we have the font back. It's like, no, bitch, you have a person back. She's still a living being. We both talked about this. I don't mean to like steal your thunder, but both of us were just like, what the fuck? Yeah, you're the worst. Yeah, and she did it twice, to the point where even Elspeth was like, she has a name. Like, they called her the font and then a bargaining chip.
Right.
And it was like, she's neither of those things. Her name's Giada. She's a person. She's right there, in fact, too. Like, you're talking about her like she's not right there. Like, she's an object, which is real messed up.
Right.
But she's right there. Like, talk to her. Anyway. So, yes. F Ginny. But regardless.
You can't talk to her, Joe. She's a bargaining chip.
Yeah, exactly. She's just an object. We're going to wring her out, get all that halo, get nice and rich, and really, more importantly, what it's going to mean is it's going to run out and then she's dead, and then they're going to look for another font to wring dry.
Which isn't going to happen.
No. But anyway, they're in the Obscura stronghold, they get attacked. The Obscura are not part of the assault. Why? Well, because if you have the font with you, and you know that the font is going to be showing up with Ginny, then you don't reveal yourselves, or you don't reveal which of you are the double agents, if you will, or the spies, because it means that later on, you can have that big reveal where now you can actually snatch her up because they trust you. Something that very much bothered, Kamiz. I did write her name down. Kamiz, Kamiz. She's the cephalid from the Obscura.
I don't know.
Sure, I don't care. Like I said, very irrelevant to me. Kamiz is revealed to be part of the setup. So Kamiz says, come in here with me, let's check out how Jetmir's doing, blah, blah, blah. Then when the assault happens, Kamiz is like, quick, come with me, everybody this way. They run out the back after some fighting. They run out the back and go through some, like through a secret door and through, like, some tunnels. And these are the Obscura tunnels that the Obscura use to get to all different places in the city. And then when they get to the other side is when the Obscura ambush them. It's a trap, be careful, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And,
typical.
Right. And now they're all in a fight. And Elspeth turns the corner to where Ginny and Giada are, and the story mentions that Kamiz is on the ground crawling away from Ginny because Ginny has attacked Kamiz. Now what Elspeth says is, clearly what happened is, and then proceeds to tell you what the author wants you to know happened.
Right.
But they're Obscura tunnels. So presumably the Obscura, any and all of them, know of the tunnels' existence.
Right, and probably know them pretty well, too.
So if you know that there's an assault on the Obscura stronghold that they're all in, and you're not a part of that assault, but you are part of another team that's going to be intercepting from that assault, why does Kamiz have to have been in on it? Because that's what we are told Elspeth knows happened. That Ginny realized that Kamiz led them into this trap, cuts at her, she gets injured, she being Kamiz, gets injured and crawls away. and Elspeth just blanketly tells us this. Why does that have to be what it was? Commies used the known Obscura tunnels and ran into Obscura. Why does that mean? Right. So why does that mean that Commies is a traitor? Maybe Ginny slashed at a completely innocent woman in Commies, or Cephalid.
Right.
In Commies, who had no idea that these Obscura were going to be here, and that that's the trap that they were going to be led into. But because we were flat out told it by the author, it has to be that way.
Right.
But that's not what a thorough read, in my opinion, that's not what a thorough read of the story would automatically cause you to assume. So, like, it could have been left obscure. Sorry. I literally couldn't think of a better way to say it. Yeah, you're welcome. I deserve it. Leave your booze in the comments. Leave a like if you disliked what I just did. That makes sense, right?
Yes.
It doesn't, but...
It does.
Okay.
And ring the bell.
Why? Why couldn't you leave it open-ended like that? You had to, like, ham-fist it in there of, like, Elspeth knows what occurred. Really? Because I wouldn't know what occurred.
Nah.
How the hell does she have that, like, extra sensory ability like that?
And
it doesn't make any sense.
She could have made that conclusion.
Yeah.
She doesn't really know.
Right. Except, instead it was just like, what must have occurred was, like, no. Ginny is irrational and super upset right now. She slashed at Commies. Okay, what a surprise. Commies is crawling away. We literally never hear from Commies for the rest of the story. Hence why I said, when I couldn't even remember her name, that it was really irrelevant overall.
Yeah, because they don't even tell you if she's dead or alive.
Nope, she just crawls away, and that's the end. Like, it's so weird. We also don't know if Ginny is dead or alive. Because Ginny stays behind in that interaction. That's with the scooping up and the running away and blah, blah, blah that we just talked about. So, like, anyway, it's very weird. And I was like, okay, so we have to believe that this is a thing because it's a thing. Like, we're told that it occurred.
Yeah, which
even
means
though we have no idea that it actually occurred that way.
To me, that means one of two things. That either they, like, wrote it all out to, like, describe that that's what happened, and then they needed to shorten it, so they shortened it.
Maybe.
Or what happened was they couldn't... I mean, I assume they're capable of coming up with a story to go along with that, to make it...
To make it all match up kind of thing?
So I think the other option is we're gonna find out later that it wasn't that.
There is no later.
Right. This is the final main story.
Yeah, no, there's no
So
way.
I don't know how they would go about doing that.
They won't.
But
there's no way. Especially for that. There's no reason to. That was like one of the most... And I'm not arguing with you, right? I'm kind of going along with your train of thought. I hear what you're saying. I just can't imagine there would be a reason for it. Yeah. Like, it's one of the most inconsequential parts of the story. Like, it happened, they got attacked, they left from that attack. It was just an avenue to get them further along in the plot. Like, I don't see a need for them to, like, deep dive on it later on, you know what I mean? Speaking of things Speaking of things that I agreed with you on, there's a line that you asked me to write down that I also enjoyed, but I want you to be able to give your take on it. A swell of pride rushed through Elspeth. JaAR was clever, becoming stronger and more confident by the moment. Mm-hmm. It was just something you asked me to write down. So
I had you write that down because I was like, oh, okay, so we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about at least, pretty much the same stuff as I did in the last main story JaAR, which was adult competencies, and what was the other thing?
I don't know.
What's the line again?
The line is, a swell of pride rushed through Elspeth. JaAR was clever, becoming stronger and more confident by the moment.
Yeah, I guess that's just talking about adult competencies. Yeah. But there was another one
There'll be
that
more
I
later.
Said because of something else that we wrote down.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I guess we're just, I'm basically just going over the same stuff I did in the last episode of the main story, which was just like, so I'll do that, I guess. Adult competencies. I'm not going to go super into it because if you watch any of these JaARs, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, then, well, look it up or check one of the other videos.
Yeah. Yeah, totally fair. And again, we have more to talk about in this story as well. Where
that's why I'm not going to harp on it forever,
fair,
because if you've seen the other episodes of JaAR, then you know exactly what I'm talking about.
One of the things that I wrote here that I wanted to talk about, and then we kind of both talked about it as it came up in the story. Elspeth, earlier on in the story, when she gets like slammed in the chest with a hammer or something, and like her ribs break and she's legit dying. And she says she feels a familiar sensation of like Erebos's fingers grabbing at her, and like if he wanted, he could like snuff her out. And I went back and like reread it for myself, because it doesn't say that that's what's happening here. Because we had this discussion, like, as far as I know, the Amonkhet, holy crap, sorry, the Theros gods. There are Amonkhet gods, but the Theros gods do not have influence across planes. We haven't seen it. I don't believe it's true. In fact, if it was true, then whatever the new Gruul god's name is, again, whose name is going to escape me in this exact moment, but the new Gruul god on Theros, who created the construct planeswalker, wouldn't have needed to create a construct planeswalker. She would have just been able to reach across the planes herself, but instead needed to make a planeswalker to do it for her. So I don't believe they have that type of reach and influence. So if that's the case, Elspeth is just comparing the feeling of dying to having died on Theros and feeling Erebos's clutch or whatever snuffing her life out.
Yeah, but that's not really what we were talking about for it, right?
So then it follows, you're absolutely right. So then it follows that she then mentions, and I have it here somewhere, she later beseeches, quote, the cruel and uncaring gods. Okay, which gods? Is it the Theros gods, who you know can't actually reach you here because you're a planeswalker, so you get that, like, there are other gods on other planes, and, like, they exist there,
right,
and then the Theros gods exist on Theros, or are you talking about the new Capenna gods? Because if you're talking about the new Capenna gods, I mean, we know that angels are a thing, and you know that angels are a thing, but neither we nor, to our knowledge, Elspeth, have heard anything about any religions on the plane, any gods that are being worshipped, if they are, like, deities with, like, physical form that is discussed, or if it's just, like, an amorphous, like, creator type of a situation. There's nothing whatsoever that's discussed. So, like, who are these cruel and unfeeling gods that she's talking about? Or cruel and uncaring, excuse me. Gods that she's talking about. I just don't understand, like...
Well, my point was, her religion didn't change just because she went to a different plane. Like, say I'm dying, and I stumble into a mosque, I'm not gonna ask Allah for assistance in my death because I walked into a mosque, you know?
I guess.
That's not my God.
Sure, I think the difference is... there are understandings that planeswalkers have that we mere plane-bound mortals don't, but if you're not on the same plane of existence as your arguably semi-corporeal god entity, then your prayers are irrelevant. Like, yes, it may just be... Right. It may just be desperation of a dying mind, of like, help, please, and you're reaching out to anything at all, so okay, I'll reach out to my faith. Sure. But I didn't think that was what was happening here, because that's not from her death. The Erebos thing was earlier in the story, and then later on was the cruel and uncaring gods thing. So, like, it was odd to me. I was like, which gods is she talking about? Because we have not, and we will eventually, but we have not yet gotten, and at the time that this story came out, it didn't exist yet, we have not gotten to the Planeswalker's Guide to Streets of New Capenna, or to New Capenna, or whatever. If and when we read that and it tells us about the Pantheon, if there is one, then maybe we'll know that Elspeth might have gotten some of that information from being with the Cabaretti or being with the Maestros or just being around and seeing all of these things. It's possible, but we have no context for that right now. So, and we wouldn't at the time that the story came out, despite the fact that now at the time that we're reviewing it, the Planeswalker's Guide is out. We are reviewing these stories in the order that they come out. So,
Right. So when this story got put out, the Planeswalker's Guide had not been put out.
And
yet.
would not be for quite some time. So we just have no context for it. So like, I guess the best thing we have is what you said, where it's just like reaching out for kind of anything and defaulting to the faith that you were raised on or that you've adopted in your life, that like you're just like, please, cruel and uncaring gods, help. Okay, maybe, right? Like that's the most plausible that I can think of explanation. As always, if you have a better one or a different one, let us know in the comments.
Right, and in that kind of a situation too, like you're not going to be in the frame of mind of being like, I wonder if my gods can hear me right now.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to be like, help!
Yeah, exactly. You're a little preoccupied in like dying or someone else dying and you're trying to save them. Yeah, perfectly fair. So let's get into some of the bigger stuff that you wanted to talk about. There's a large paragraph here that I want to read. Do you want me to read it all, and then if you want to go word line by line, we will, or you want me to stop after each line?
I would say read it all, because I think a lot of the stuff that I had you write down for in this story is stuff that is straightforward enough where you can just read the quote and then I can just talk about it for a couple minutes.
I agree and appreciate that. That's perfect. So we are at a moment with Elspeth and JaAR is kind of, again, coming into her own a little bit more. Suddenly, the word home held meaning, because JaAR had just said, I'm home. So suddenly the word home held meaning. Elspeth shared a long stare with JaAR, who wore an enigmatic smile. She radiated like the angels of the cathedral. Her very form seemed to belong here, as though it were a piece finally returning to its spot. Home, Elspeth echoed. Home was purpose. It was defending those who needed her. Ajani had been right. Home had never been about place. And for the first time, Elspeth felt like she had found somewhere she belonged. She had found purpose, someone and something to believe in and defend.
Right. So I had you write that down because
it's awesome.
and we've talked about this in previous JaARs as well, but it was a lot less recent, so I'll kind of reiterate again.
Sure.
But we've talked about how in a trauma journey you kind of have to, as you're trying to heal, you kind of have to learn that home is your connection to all things. And in a more recent JaAR, we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how if those needs aren't met, you can't reach having that capacity really to, you can understand the concept, especially if you've been there before, right? But you can't really like get back to it and really feel it and know it very like intrinsically and all throughout you unless those basic needs are met and like met with, you know, some kind of standards. You know, like I have shelter, but it's like a lean-to. That's not really, you know, that's not really sufficiently
like having met that need.
Having met that need, yeah.
Yeah.
So basically this whole paragraph, what it's saying is Elspeth is finally learning what Ajani was saying all along as being true by seeing it happen to JaAR. She is ascending because she's an angel and turning into like a crazy being of light. but she's also becoming mindful. And reaching a maturity where she's able to understand that, and it's not that she didn't know that she wasn't home before, because you always know,
Yeah.
I think, that you aren't home when you're not, right? But she was able to learn what home was by being back in the presence of other angels, and hearing them and feeling them, and being able to shine her light in a way that she was never able to before because she was being abused.
Yeah.
So.
And in fact, earlier on in the story, which kind of leads into this whole discussion, like the words purpose and duty were used a million times in this story. And that's not a negative necessarily. It all stems from the same thing, but it's because earlier on in the story, which we did not really write down, JaAR was kind of questioning herself because of all the bullshit that she had been fed about, you're going to save the plane, you're going to change the plane, you are the font, we need you, you are the end-all be-all, and you'll save everyone. And so JaAR is sitting there with Elspeth and Vivian, and she's like, what if I can't do it?
Right.
What if I can't save everyone? And it's like, and that's the moment of Elspeth being like, look, I can't answer this for you.
And that was a moment that really hit me hard, because when she said she was scared, I was like, of course she is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, of course she is. And then Elspeth goes, of what? I want to know what you have to say.
Right, because Elspeth, again, it was very much like what you were talking about with Elspeth, like caring about her and understanding, despite what we talked about earlier, where it was like there was that moment of not that, but that otherwise it was that.
Well, and giving her that autonomy to be like, instead of me assuming what it is you're afraid of, I'm going to ask.
Well, and not for nothing, I don't want to speak out of turn if it's something that I'm not fully familiar with. A part of therapy is simply just being able to talk about things. That's pretty damn important.
Right.
So even just that little bit of, like, I'm scared. What are you scared of? Talk to me about it. Like, once you get it out, maybe it's a little bit less scary because now you've put words to it.
Right.
Or whatever.
And a lot of times in those cases, you might not necessarily be able to vocalize what it is you're afraid of until someone actually physically asks you, what is it?
Right. And
because you're afraid of it and you don't necessarily know what you are afraid of until someone asks you, and then you are thinking enough about how to answer the question that it teaches you what it is you actually fear.
Right. Well, and not only that, because it could also be that it's somewhat of an amorphous thing, and once you actually try to put words to it, you think about it, you're thinking about it more analytically maybe, as opposed to just being paralyzed by fear of it, and so you get to, like, move on from there. So yeah.
But circling back to my point.
Please.
When she ever said that, I was like, that's what you're afraid of? Seriously? Ugh.
Yeah, because
of course you are, right? Because that's what everybody's always fucking afraid of, right? It's never that your fucking abuser is gonna come back and steal you away from the one person who's actually taking care of you. No. It's that you're not enough.
Yep.
Because you're an abuse victim, and that's your response when you're an abuse victim, is to think, instead of, you are an abuser who is abusing me, and I don't deserve that, and I need to get away from you, your response is, there's something wrong with me. And so, it's fucking typical, right?
Yeah.
I hate it.
Yeah.
But, you know, I gotta talk about the mental health stuff, and it
was rough.
I would be the worst if I didn't talk about that. Because that's what happens.
Yeah. There was a line that you had me write down here that you wanted me to write down that I thought was also fun. Obnixilis finally shows up and confronts Elspeth, Giada, and Vivian. And Vivian is the first one to come at him, which is, oh my god. The line where it talks about him just like, she shoots an arrow when a spectral wolf comes out, and Obnixilis just punches through the face of the wolf, and it just disappears with a yelp. God, I was laughing so hard. That's so funny to me.
Yeah, it was,
We've only ever seen her shoot those arrows and have those animals like maul the crap out of people. And then she shoots one at Obnixilis and he's just like, bop! And then the wolf just goes away. Like, that image in my mind was hilarious.
Yeah. I wasn't as thrilled with it because I wasn't expecting it to be quite so campy.
Yeah.
And so when it was less serious than I felt it should have been, I was a little... I felt like it wasn't respected in the way it could have been. But
yeah, we're gonna have some stuff to talk about, and I would love because we have not discussed that. I wrote this down, but anyway, the line here that Obnixilis says to Vivian after she shoots that arrow, and then a bunch of like other enforcers from other families show up as like the add-ons to the final boss fight, kind of a thing, and Vivian goes to take them out. And Obnixilis says, "Play with my agents until I'm ready to torment you."
Yeah, loved that one.
That's an interesting line. And again, we'll get to it.
And that one was funny to me. And I was like, okay, so like they're doing a evil person is funny thing, like kind of like what they did with Nicol Bolas.
Kind of, sure.
But I just felt like none of the rest of the story did that, and so it really felt like out of place, and then it just kind of was over, so it was like just a quick flash in the pan kind of thing. And I didn't feel like the other stories were like that either, really.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I could have enjoyed it more if I felt prepared for it, I guess.
Okay. The next line you wanted me to write down, or next quote,
okay.
That's cool, we can move on. Okay. She had found duty and purpose only to be met with more failure. More failure.
Yeah, I had you write that one down because I didn't understand what the first failure was.
And I think it's a valid question. We discussed it a bit. The only thing I can think of is her concern with not having stopped the Phyrexians like she wanted to, or not finding out more about the Phyrexians like she wanted to, dying on Theros and being gone for so long in the afterlife, etc.
I think it's just an inner critic moment. You know, she just, in that moment, couldn't help Giada.
And I would...
And it just made her feel like everything leading up to that was a failure, and this was too. Even though, realistically speaking, she never failed.
I'll be negative for a second. It could also be something that should have been in the Theros Beyond Death story that we never got to see, or read, or whatever, or hear about, or anything of the sort. It's doubtful,
Fair.
But it's possible. And there's no way for us to know that because we have been given no information, and it seems like we possibly never will.
Right.
Just, it's been written off entirely, and I would be very surprised. I would say, I'd eat my hat, but I don't really want to eat a hat if enough people complain about it and they actually do it. So, anyway. The next one is kind of a bigger one, because we're in this cathedral or church or whatever you want to call it, but this like holy place with these statues that end up glowing when Giada's there. Elspeth is losing to Obnixilis and is desperately trying to get Giada to run away, to leave, to go be safe, because Elspeth has made a promise. She promised to keep her safe, so please go run away. Giada's response, no, there is nowhere for me to run. Don't fear for me any longer, Elspeth. There is more for me out there. I'm going to be with my family now. These quotes kind of jump around a bit, but they're all in the same, like, couple of paragraphs.
There's, like, descripting lines in between that we
like,
cut out for...
Yeah. Obnixilus looked at them. Like, that's not part of this in particular, but yeah. She was more of an outline of shimmering magic now than a physical being. Family. It was something Elspeth once knew through Ajani. Daxos. JaAR's words ignited something deep within her. A flickering candle of hope, no brighter than a faint glow she'd seen covering her earlier. The faint glow she'd seen covering her earlier, sorry. Thank you for everything. I found my answers. This is JaAR talking. Let me protect you now.
Yeah. So, like I said before, this is where it's coming full circle, right? All of a sudden now, not only has Elspeth actually learned from helping JaAR that what Ajani did for her was what she needed to do for JaAR, but also then JaAR's gone through this transformation and has ended up, like I said before, this sort of ascended, mindful person who is now able to say, okay, I'm capable, I'm wise, and now I can help you get through what you're trying to get through, instead of it being all a one-sided relationship of you trying to help me. That's what an actual loving relationship is, right? Is this ability to jump in and help the person that you love that needs your help. And then, you know, when you need help, they'll do the same for you. It's not going to be this, you know, uneven or like, I expect you to pay me back for these things I've done for you kind of a thing.
Right.
Those are, you know, unhealthy relationships.
Yeah.
Healthy relationships are where you know, okay, this person whom I love is going through something. I'm in a position to help them. I can help them. And then when they're able to help me and I need it, they'll respond in kind.
Yeah.
And that day may never come because circumstances are what they are, right? Mm-hmm. But you're not sitting there keeping score. And if you are, then you don't really love the person whom you're helping.
Right, you just love what you can get out of them, like they're some kind of a tool or a bargaining chip or something.
A font of Halo that you're gonna ring out, and yes.
So along that point, along those lines, I want to jump ahead a bit to another quote you had me write down, because you talked about Elspeth having heard from Ajani. Then I mentioned earlier Elspeth being Ajani to JaAR's Elspeth-like problems. And so sure enough, if you're talking about it coming full circle, here's that other quote as well. Elspeth heard Ajani in JaAR's words.
Right.
Her friend still spoke to her across time and place. Home was duty. Family was those she chose to defend. She'd always had everything she ever needed.
Yes, and you mentioned duty before.
Yes.
Along with, what was the other word?
Purpose.
Purpose. And it's interesting. I feel like those words are words that people misinterpret a lot. And those words are important here. And the meanings of them here are really important too. So I want to address that. Purpose and duty in this story does not mean I know the reason why I'm alive and I have to do these things as a result. What it means is I understand fully now that I will never truly know what it is I have to do. And that's okay. Because if I'm doing the right thing and I'm being there for the people whom I love, so fighting for them, but not really, right? It's not, taking the sword and slashing. It's being there for them, right? And doing the right thing, like I said before, not keeping score. That is what duty is. And understanding the duty, right, is what gives you the purpose. And so, those two words have a much more broad meaning than I feel like a lot of people give them. And they think that when they're not in that mindful place, or they don't have those meaningful, healthy relationships, they still think they have purpose and duty, and they've given them things that are definitions that actually mean basically the opposite. So they think their duty is to somebody like Ginny, who keeps score, right? She says, I take care of you, so you need to pay me in Halo, essentially. And
be the font, change the plane, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so that's duty, right?
Good point.
And then, so purpose is be the font, change the plane. But that's not what they really mean, right? Because that's wrong. It's not, I take care of you, give me Halo. That's not her duty. That's not her duty. And her purpose is not, be the font, change the plane. Her duty is to Elspeth, someone who truly loves her.
Right.
And to respect her the same way Elspeth respects her. And her purpose, therefore, is to understand that that's her duty. And it gives her the purpose of being able to say, now I know that I can be competent, and I can be wise, and I can ascend and go home and return to the all-encompassing energy, the radiant light that I am born of, and become so much more than I was ever able to be, right? So that's what that really means. And it's really cool that those words are used here. And I can talk about that because I feel like in life, those words are only used. They're only ever used when it's wrong, when it isn't real, when it's a hollow duty and a hollow purpose that are not what those words really mean. So, yeah, I thought that that was really cool that they used those words there, and it was a little off-putting to me because I, too, associate those words with what everyone associates those words with. Until I thought about it. And I realized, no, this is a good moment for talking about in JaAR because people need to sense further in and realize what those words really mean. And when they can do that, they get to go home. They get to ascend.
Mm-hmm. Be with their family.
Right. They get to be that mindful, wise, capable, ascended person that they're meant to be. Who can then, in kind, help others. Instead of being stuck in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and not being able to help anyone else.
Sure.
Because they can't even help themselves. Right?
Yeah. And in fact, one of the lines that's used here, that JaAR, like wisdom that JaAR imparts, if you will, is a quote to Elspeth: "Your failures don't define you." Just flat out.
Yeah.
I mean, you again, that was something else you wanted me to write down, so kind of goes along with what you were just talking about. But
well, and it goes along with what I said in the beginning too. Like, I would be a jerk if I didn't have you write that part down and talk about it. But it's so straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, what could that possibly mean?
right. You know, I don't really need to explain what that means. You know, the duty and purpose thing I really needed to go into.
Yeah.
But that, no, I mean, you know what that means.
Yeah.
And that's in response to that critic in her head telling her that she had failed.
Right. That it was another failure, more failure, whatever.
Right, and those failures that she's counting don't exist. It wasn't just that I'm reading this story and going, well, she didn't really fail.
Yeah.
She tried and she didn't quite get there.
Yeah.
No, those failures didn't exist.
Yeah.
What she was doing was helping while everything around her was in shambles. That's not a failure at all.
Yep.
It's not even one, let alone multiple failures, you know?
One of the other cool lines that we wrote down just in general, it reached a true, it here being this hymn of angels, this choir song that Elspeth hears, that JaAR hears, that JaAR says to Elspeth, "Can you hear it?" And Elspeth's like, "I do hear it." This hymn is happening, and the line says, "It reached a true crescendo of joy, as if to overwrite the screams of the Cabaretti celebration that had dared to take the same name." So good. So good. I don't remember whether it was you that, like, whether we both said it or whether you were just like, you should
No.
write that down, but like...
Well, you read it and you were like, oh, that's such a great line.
It's sick.
And then
yeah.
you went to keep reading and I was like, wait, write that down.
It's good.
Like,
it was good.
Like, I don't know if we really have to talk about it, but it's just a cool line.
It's a very good line, yeah. Okay. So then, into like a story beat, Elspeth, once JaAR ascends, and JaAR says to her, "You've always had everything you've ever needed." Right? Something to that effect. Elspeth then goes to pick up her clunky-ass, terrible sword that she had, I guess, got from the Maestro's armory or whatever, right? So, in the museum. So, she picks up her clunky sword, and it's no longer a clunky sword. Now, it's a halo sword that is more properly weighted for her form, and etc., and she is easily able to use it to beat back Obnixilis. And not only does she beat back Obnixilis, she slashes his throat open.
Yeah.
And he's literally clutching at it as it bleeds through his hands, and he planeswalks away. Is there anybody, raise your hand if you think he's dead.
He could cauterize that shit, just like...
He's a demon, yeah, of course he could. He might not have, he could, I mean, who knows where he planeswalked to? He could just planeswalk to a plane of fire, and just be like, that's better. You know, like,
It evaporated off.
It rubs some dirt on it. It's only my jugular. I don't. Anyway, so yes, Ob leaves the plane. That's how he ends up leaving the plane again. Like a 1% chance he's actually dead.
Yeah.
0%. Like there's no way. There's just no way. 0%.
Yep.
Anyway, then we get back to the museum in the. Why can't I think of the word? Epilogue. Good Lord. We get back to the museum for the epilogue where everything is kind of winding down. Elspeth and Vivian are back together, and everybody's fine. JaAR's obviously not there because very unclear. I wrote this down. Very unclear. And folks, I think there were folks discussing this online shortly after the story came out as well. But if people are unaware, the flash of light and JaAR like talking to Elspeth from far away through that whisper. Yes, JaAR ascended to an angel, but all those other statues were also angels that came to life. I'm just saying, some people were unclear on that. Sorry, I don't mean to be like lecturing you like, Amy, you need to understand, sorry. But yes, other people were...
and purpose.
Other people were unclear on that. So yes, if it was a question, the angels are back on New Capenna. Or on Capenna, in whatever the hell you want to call it.
Okay,
but,
so it wasn't just that JaAR ascended to them and they were kind of alive in the statues to help her ascend or whatever, and then were no longer alive in the statues. They are now legit. There's angels on New Capenna.
It seems that way, yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
That seems to be the story they attempted to tell, and unfortunately, I feel, failed to tell that aspect of that story. Personally.
Luckily, we're not defined by our failures.
God damn it. I really liked in the epilogue, Xander has the letter that he found. Now, again, right, we had this exact issue earlier with what's her butt, the cephalid. I could turn the page to find her name. Commies.
Yes.
I otherwise didn't care. But sure, I figured it out. Commies.
Don't be rude. Some people like her as a character.
If you do, leave it in the comments.
Yeah.
And to you, I apologize.
And I like cephalids.
Cephalids are cool. This particular cephalid, I kind of couldn't care less about.
Yeah, and you don't because the story doesn't make you.
Yes.
And that's the point.
Yes.
Is that, the story doesn't make you care about this character.
In what was almost certainly the first side story, I talked about that cephalid, that Keza, that I actually cared about. We thought she was dead. I felt sad about it, and then she was fine.
Her name just now, so there you go.
Well, she's a very good card in the set. But,
well, still.
But yes, exactly, yes. Okay. So, Angelo finds this letter. Apparently, he's on his way to the crescendo, right? The event at the Cabaretti's place. And he finds this letter, like, sewn into his suit. And turns around and heads his way back to the museum. And so, he's on his way back to the museum, but he avoids Obnixilis and the bloodshed of that group killing Xander, but he also avoids the bloodshed of everybody getting attacked at the crescendo. So he just happens to be en route in between the two places the whole time and misses all of it.
I also want to know how he made it that long with a piece of paper having been sewn into his suit. Because paper does not sew well. You can sew it, but it will rip very quickly.
Oh, I didn't know if it meant like it was a secret compartment and the paper was folded up in the compartment. So it was like it was like a sewn in piece of fabric holding a piece of paper.
Oh, okay.
That was how I read it, but it could be either way, yeah.
I was just like, what the heck? Would they like embroider the letter like on a piece of fabric and sew that in?
That'd be sick.
Yeah, that would be needlessly time consuming.
Big waste of
just tell him the message.
Yep.
Then.
Yeah, so Angelo has the letter. He gives the letter to Elspeth to read. And so yeah, I don't buy Angelo's story. And again, because I don't think, now that the last side story we did was about Angelo, I'm sure the final one is not also going to be about Angelo, where we hear about that transitionary time. But I found it very suspect. So I just wanted to throw it out there. I don't trust him. And if that's something that they want to bring forth for the future, where like maybe Angelo is the bad guy the next time we come back to Streets of New Capenna, because he is still attempting to work for the adversary in some capacity. Maybe we find that out. That it's something that they could absolutely write in for that story if they needed one to come back to it.
Right.
Who knows? Just throwing it out there, it seems very suspect.
But what exactly is suspect about it? Because I didn't have that same feeling, I don't think.
Well, like I said, so Angelo wasn't at the museum when the adversary and his forces attacked Xander. But he also wasn't at the crescendo where he was supposed to be, where the adversary's forces attacked everybody over there. So, again, all of this bloodshed is happening at both of the places that he could be at that moment, but he just happens to be in transit at that time for him to avoid both incidents.
Well, he really hates traveling cabs, Joe.
Yeah, I know, I heard. He should after the last story. He definitely should. All right, we're not close to... We still have more stuff to talk about. So, and thank you for bearing with us, because I think this stuff is important. In the letter...
I didn't feel like anything he said seemed disingenuous. I just... Like, I understand that what you're saying is that, like, the timeline just kind of doesn't work.
Yeah, I thought... Well, no. Again, it's just that section. Everything after that, and everything that we've heard about him prior, he seems like a cool dude. I like him. Okay. I'm just talking about just his quick little explanation of where he was in that moment is suspect. But, as we know, some of the best bad guys, especially spy-like bad guys, are ones who can make themselves seem like they're all buddy-buddy with you until the exact moment that they stab you in the back.
Right.
And until then, you're all smiles and sunshine with them. So
or make you stand under a statue that hits you with an axe.
Exactly.
You know, like you do.
So, with the letter... Elspeth reads it, and the quote from Angelo said about Xander, Xander always knew what would happen in New Capenna, often before any of the rest of us. And you and I both talked about this, that this whole time, we as, again, if you're unfamiliar, we are the Mastros. They are the Maestros. So we had a bit of a connection to this particular family that's based on Italian families. I'll give you one hint as to what part of your and what my lineage is from. But yeah, so we've had a bit of a connection. And I always felt like the Maestros got the short end of the stick here in this set. Like they kind of got shit on the whole time. But... one, they were one of the two families that were like really focused on, right? Obscura, we didn't see a lot of, at least for the demon leaders, right? We didn't see a lot of Obscura brokers or riveteers in these stories. Not a lot at all. But Maestros we got a lot of, and Cabaretti we got the second largest amount of.
Right.
And so, but that line caused us both to agree that Xander always knowing what was going to happen on New Capenna, and again, he knew of his death. He knew he was going to be dying. He knew that the adversary was coming for him. But notice, the adversary came for him. Ob Nixilis took out Xander himself, and first. Alongside the attack at the crescendo, which was just a bunch of people that Ob Nixilis sent along, and they injured Jetmir. Dire injury that if he was not properly cared for quickly, he would likely also have died. We heard about that in this story. But Ob Nixilis didn't do that. The nameless, faceless droves that he had pulled to his side did. But who took out Xander? Ob Nixilis alone. So I think that is a huge show of respect. So I guess I have to take back a lot of what I said about the Maestros getting... I felt like the Maestros were getting shit on a lot. It's kind of not the case that Ob Nixilis went in there with that purpose and that feeling because it needed to be a thing. He deserved it.
Yeah, well, I think he recognized Xander as being a significant threat, whereas I think the other family leaders were less significant of a threat to him.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, there is a level of respect there, I think, to be like, this guy is going to need me to kill him because nobody else is going to be able to get the job done.
Mm-hmm. He was pretty good. I mean, again, especially considering he had a bum knee or whatever, he's walking with a cane, and he still was able to fight off all those people and almost got Obnixilis.
Right.
He didn't, but he almost did.
He almost did.
Yeah, which is impressive considering.
Yeah. And it's not a failure.
I mean, he's dead, but sure, it's not a failure.
It's not a failure.
Oh, my God.
But he, I mean, and we talked about this as well. You and I, not in the episode, but we talked about how the line that they said that he, you know, he knows before anybody else knows what's going on the plane.
Yeah.
So, or in New Capenna, not the entirety of the plane.
Regardless.
But, because Vivian talked about that.
That's literally the next thing we'll talk about. Go ahead. Keep going.
So if he knows everything that's going to happen on New Capenna before it even ever does, that's the guy that Obnixilis needs to focus on. That's the guy that needs to die first.
Yep.
Right? Because he's the one who's going to ultimately stand in Obnixilis' way at the end if he ends up getting away with his life. Meanwhile, the other guys, the other heads of houses or whatever, they're going to be a lot easier to deal with in the late game than somebody who's going to be anticipating you and somebody who is hard to kill.
Yeah. And so then to your point of Vivian, Vivian's quote was, towards the end of the story, "There's more to this plane than one city. If New Capenna's fate is to destroy itself, then nature will reclaim it. Life will persist on this plane."
Right. It was Vivian's way of saying the culture of New Capenna might define New Capenna, but it doesn't define the plane as a whole. So this, and I talked about it in the second to last JaAR again as well, I'll say. That scarcity mentality that everybody's living in of, let's get the halo, let's literally murder the angel that's going to provide it to us for the short period of time that she's then able to provide it to us, as opposed to like cultivating and fostering just like protection and everything else for her, and like so she can like siphon it off slowly and actually be kept alive, and not just kept alive but also like treated well and kept happy and stuff like that too, heaven forbid. And that's not a pun because she's an angel, it's just, you know, but the fact that everybody in New Capenna is so, oh my God, you know, we need to make sure that we get this halo, otherwise New Capenna is going to just implode, right? Vivian's standing back. She's saying New Capenna is not the only place that exists on the entirety of this plane. If it implodes, it implodes. You know, that doesn't mean that civilization on this entire plane is just wiped out. You know, it means that, you know, there's other people living here, and or there are other creatures living here that are going to continue to be alive, or there are other plants living here that are going to continue to be alive and thrive probably a lot more than they would have if New Capenna had stayed around and polluted and done all the things that, you know, are the reason why animals and plants are dying in the real world. So, yeah. Vivian's point is well taken. That, like, you know...
Life finds a way.
Yeah. And, you know, my point that I like to make pretty frequently is everything has a lifespan. If New Capenna's lifespan is up, it's up. And there's no point mourning over it, because everything else will still go on.
Yeah. Last two things that I had. What I liked about this story, or what I found interesting about the end of the story, is that for the first time in a while, a story is actually, or a story of a plane is actually ending, pointing us to the next plane and giving us a reason why we're going there next. That hasn't happened in a very, very long time.
No.
So
that doesn't happen.
It's been a bit. I mean, back when we were doing the story of the 5 members of the Gatewatch, or the 4 and then the 5 members of the Gatewatch,
right.
You knew exactly what plane we were going to next because they told us. They were like, oh, well, we're going to have to go here now to try this thing out or check this out. That made sense. Now it's just like, oh, well, we're going here, we're going here, we're going here. But I will say that fact, combined with the fact that I have already praised the murder art from this set for being so close to the way it was in the story, or vice versa. The story being so close to the way it was in the art, I actually have a little bit of hope. Maybe it's actually something that they're like, oh, we can talk to one another, we should communicate about this so that we can actually plan further ahead than just, okay, this story's done, let's look at the next one. What do we have to work with? Okay, whatever, it's going to be these people, sure. Let's find out what their backstories were, give them a reason to be there, but have no interconnectedness one way or another from the last plane that we were just on to the next one that we're going to. Because it doesn't need to. The sets sell themselves, right? Well, sure, but giving us a reason, like, you're already trying to do the interconnectedness, so this was a nice thing. We're going back to Dominaria now because Elspeth is now on her way to Dominaria to give the information to a Johnny. Well, Dominaria United or whatever the hell it's called, I don't remember. I believe it's Dominaria United, and I apologize if it's not. But it's coming up. We will be reviewing those stories, don't you worry. But yeah, there's that. Last but not least, the kind of overarching thing that I want to talk about, unless you had anything to talk about on that point.
I'm done.
Okay, very good. Is that in Strixhaven, whoever the boss of the Arik was, again, am I going to remember his name? No, not sitting right here right now. Sorry. I care, but I also don't care. But the boss of the Arik, who was the big bad of Strixhaven, right, who the twins are fighting against, Will and Rowan, he was a cartoon villain. He was just like, I want absolute power and you will not stop me, you meddling kids. Literally calling them meddling kids. Like it was awful. Like, his dialogue was crap. This story had moments where it felt like I was watching a Saturday morning cartoon. I liked watching Saturday morning cartoons. They were fun. But Magic the Gathering is for ages 13 plus. These stories all say at the top of them, please be advised, there may be some content in these stories that parents might find appropriate for their children to be reading. Children is under the age of 18, at least here in the United States, or here in New York specifically, I guess, in the United States. An adult is 18 and up. Under that is still under parental guidance. So that means a 17-year-old, their parent needs to be warned about the content of these stories. At least warned about it in general. Whether your parent, because I'm not saying mine did, whether your parent would have had a problem with anything in any of these stories is irrelevant. Wizards put up that warning because they feel that it is something that needs to exist for their stories. But then their stories with big bad enemies read like a Saturday morning cartoon. Those things don't match up for me.
Nope.
And again, not that they're not valid stories, but your failures don't define you. It's an important thing to discuss for this story, but it's also the lesson of an after-school special.
Yeah.
The villain from Strixhaven, the villain or the plot line from this set, Streets of New Capenna, reads like a Saturday morning cartoon. Like, I've watched episodes of Digimon when I was younger, or Dragon Ball Z, or Dragon Ball Super, that are exactly like this. You're like, oh wow, the guys are getting beat down. I wonder who's going to transform this time to save them all. Spoilers, this time it was JaAR. She ascended and gave them the sword, and the sword was what helped them win. That's Power Rangers, right? Like, it's just... I'm just pointing out the inconsistencies that I'm noticing with what you're saying in terms of what your story is versus what it actually is.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Maybe I'm being unfair. And one, Amy, you can let me know, but any of you can let me know as well. But I know with the big bad of Strixhaven, we felt like he was a cartoon, like a Scooby-Doo villain.
Yeah.
Right? Literally called them meddling kids. And I was like, that's what? How is that in these stories? But is that the direction they're going in? The guy who wrote War of the Spark and Forsaken, it was the same person, right?
Yeah.
Is the guy who wrote Gargoyles, a literal Saturday morning cartoon. It didn't go so well, and that's a kind of a different story entirely, but is that their goal? Is that the direction that they're going in?
I don't know, man.
Because if so, if you're asking, no thank you.
I don't have a problem with things being family friendly.
Neither do I.
But
that's not at all what I'm saying either.
But then call it what it is, I think is your point. Right?
Yes. Well, yeah, one way or another, I guess. But again, the game itself is for 13 plus. So, like, having the stories for the game that people under the age of 13 should not be playing by your own admission on your products, having the stories be family friendly, I guess if you're arguing that 13 to 17, as I mentioned before, is the family friendly aspect of it, then sure. For 13 to 17-year-olds, that's fine. But otherwise, it feels counterproductive to have your stories for your adult game be themed towards children's television, or themed like or after children's television. Again, maybe they're going for nostalgia. A big thing right now, right, is people getting in touch with their childhoods, watching shows that they used to watch when they were younger. We're guilty of it ourselves. But there aren't...
Well, and people who are our age and are doing that kind of thing have kids now.
Yes.
So if they're into Magic, maybe they're playing Magic with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And 13 plus means 13 with no parent guidance.
Well, the way that it is implemented, to my knowledge, or the way that it's supposed to be implemented, to my knowledge, and I have no inside information here, but to my recollection, what that means is, for example, if you were to go to a pre-release, the store is not really supposed to sell a pre-release kit to someone under the age of 13 to enter into an event. It's a Wizards-sponsored event, and the game is for age 13 plus. You cannot, per Wizards rules, if your game store does it, in my opinion, more power to them. Because I couldn't care less. Especially, like Amy said, if the parent is alongside them,
right,
the parent is okaying it at that point. If the parent just drops them off and is like, oh, let him play whatever he wants, and then leaves, different story, right? Now it's not in the parent's domain, although that parent kind of obviously doesn't care. But
right,
that's kind of neither here nor there.
Yeah,
but
I mean, if the parent has to bring them, that's kind of parental guidance.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, parental permission.
Right. But yes, technically, under the rules, to my knowledge, a game store is not permitted to sell a pre-release kit for an event like that, or sell entry to an event like that to someone under the age of 13. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if you know differently. I know that the packaging says 13 plus. I'm literally staring at one right in front of me. It says 13 plus on all of their products. So, like, I don't think you can sign up for an Arena account if you're not 13. Like, you can just lie about your birth date. Oh my god. But,
well, I mean, you could make the argument that the stories that are like that are stories with kids in them. Strixhaven. It's a school
yeah, but
with
they weren't.
kids in it. This has JaAR. So maybe they just try to make a family-friendly story if one of the story's main characters or plot points or whatever consists of there being kids in it.
Okay.
Because that kind of makes sense, right?
I think your statement has validity. I don't agree with it.
Okay.
But I'm also not saying that it's like, you know, I think your statement is valid.
Okay.
I don't buy it, but I think that it can have merit, especially if other folks agree. I really want to know other people's thoughts as well.
Because there have been some fairly adult stories.
100%, but not recently.
Well, but Strixhaven's not recent.
Sure, but okay. I guess I'm trying to think of Innistrad, right? Innistrad would be the one that would go above and beyond to adult territory because it's horror-based and vampires and werewolves and etc.
Okay.
But, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of any. It's very late and we've been doing this for a very long time, so I can't think of it right now. If other folks have suggestions or thoughts or comments, please let us know. But I can't think of examples off the top of my head at this very moment, sorry. I'm not in the headspace for that. But, so that's my point that I wanted to bring up. I would love folks' thoughts on that. And I'd like to keep thinking about it as we go further into stories from now on. A Dominaria United, Brothers War, etc. Like, you know, I want to see what that turns into. So.
Yeah, because the fact that you're bringing this up, I didn't notice.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, it felt very like, you know, friendship and togetherness and love, and it's like, yes, they're important, relevant things to talk about, and I'm not crapping on the idea of that being, like, can never be a story beat ever. Like I said, it just feels like we're moving in that direction a lot more, and moving away from adult themes. If that's what they want, fine. I'm okay with that. Maybe they want to remove that disclaimer from their stories so that people can feel free to read it with their under 13-year-old kids, so that, hey, pretty soon you're going to be able to play this game, kid. Let's try it out at home or whatever. I don't know. But it's something I wanted to bring up, something we can keep an eye on into the future with more stories.
Sure.
Next week, we have the final side story for this set. Then we'll move into other things that, again, the Elish Norn thing is a side story for this set, but it's not. It was released like a month later than everything else, or 2 months. So we've got other stories in the interim to do as well. I mentioned the Planeswalker's Guide. There's the LGBT story as well that I'm really looking forward to checking out. So stay tuned to the channel for any and all of those things. Like I mentioned before, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, or whenever we go live Mondays, Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. Check out our other channels, links down in the description box below as well. And please don't forget, leaving your thoughts in the comments down below about how you think the progression of these stories is going, and what you thought of this finale. Super important. What did you think of the main story for Streets of New Capenna as a whole? Doing that is a great way for you to join us as we show off our
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. Thank you so much for being here. We really, really hope that you're enjoying everything that we're doing here on this channel, whether it be JaAR, whether it be streams, whether it be whatever. And if you are appreciating it, a cool way to say thank you, likes and shares go a very long way, and we really, really appreciate it. So thank you in advance if you're doing those things. Any and all support that you're willing to give on any of our channels, any of our videos, any of our streams, really, really helpful, and we really appreciate it. Anything else?
I don't think so.
We will see you next week or later in the week for more JaAR, for more stories. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.